11.5 million documents, 40 years of dirty secrets from the most powerful people on the planet. One anonymous source who risked everything. On April 3, 2016, the world woke up and learned the truth that had been hidden from them for decades. Journalists called it the Panama Papers. But really, it was a bomb that exploded a system that had existed for centuries. Prime ministers resigned. Billionaires lost their reputations in a matter of hours. People took to the streets demanding justice. And it all started with one letter. A letter that arrived at a German newspaper from a person whose name we still don't know. A person hunted by intelligence agencies from half the planet. A person who simply wrote, "I have information that will change everything." And you know what's the scariest part? What was revealed in the Panama Papers isn't a crime. It's legal business, an entire industry that helps the rich stay rich while ordinary people pay taxes. An industry worth trillions of dollars that operates in the shadows but is completely legal. Until someone decided to bring it into the light. Let's figure out how one Panamanian law firm became the center of the biggest financial scandal in history. How a money laundering machine used by presidents and kings actually works. And why, after this massive expose, almost nothing has changed. Let's start with the place where it all happened, a small country that became a financial haven for the richest people on earth, Panama, a country with more registered companies than residents. Sounds weird? Let me explain why this is even possible and why anyone would want it. At the center of this story is a company with an unremarkable name, Mossack Fonseca, a law firm founded in 1977. From the outside, they looked like regular lawyers. Offices in downtown Panama City, suits and ties, a presentable website. But in reality, this firm was a factory for producing invisibility. They created shell companies, firms that exist only on paper, with no offices, no employees, no real business. Their only purpose? To hide who actually owns the money. Here's how it works. Let's say you're an oligarch from Russia or a corrupt official from China. You have $100 million, and you don't want anyone to know about it. Maybe the money was obtained through questionable means. Maybe you just don't want to pay taxes, or you're afraid that when power changes hands, everything will be taken from you. You call Mossack Fonseca and say, "I need a company." A few days later, you receive a package of documents. Now you own a firm registered in the British Virgin Islands. It has a nice name, a legal address, bank accounts, and most importantly, your name appears nowhere in the documents. Instead, there's a nominee, a nominal director who receives a small fee for having their name on the papers. They have no idea what the company does or who actually owns it. Now you buy a villa in London for £20 million through this company. Officially, the owner of the villa is an offshore firm from the Virgin Islands. And who owns the firm? The nominal director, some retiree from Panama who signs papers for $100 a month. And who's behind them? Nobody knows. The secret is protected by banking secrecy laws and corporate confidentiality. Beautiful, right? And Mossack Fonseca didn't do this for just a dozen clients. They created over 214,000 offshore companies for clients from 200 countries worldwide. Imagine the scale. It's an entire parallel economy, hidden from tax authorities, law enforcement, and the public. Trillions of dollars flowing around the world in invisible streams. But who actually used this firm's services? Now, here's the interesting part. Mossack Fonseca's client list included names that left the world speechless. 12 current and former heads of state. 129 politicians and high-ranking government officials, professional athletes, celebrities, billionaires, even relatives of dictators and people under international sanctions. Take a specific example. Vladimir Putin. No, his name wasn't directly in the documents, but his closest friends were all over them. Sergei Roldugin, a cellist and Putin's childhood friend who suddenly turned out to own offshore companies with assets worth $2 billion. $2 billion for a musician who publicly claimed he didn't even own an apartment and lived in rented housing. The documents showed a complex network of deals through which money flowed between companies connected to Putin's circle. Banks gave Roldugin loans worth millions, which he immediately wrote off as bad debts. The money disappeared into offshores, then resurfaced as shares in major Russian companies. Or take Iceland's Prime Minister, Sigmundur Gunnlaugsson. After the 2008 financial crisis, Icelanders took to the streets demanding punishment for the bankers and politicians who brought the country to collapse. Gunnlaugsson was one of those who promised most loudly to end corruption. And what happened? The Panama Papers showed that he and his wife owned an offshore company holding millions of dollars in bonds from Icelandic banks, the same banks that went bankrupt in the crisis. So while he was making political decisions about these banks' fate, he had a personal financial stake in the outcome, a textbook conflict of interest. When journalists asked him about it on live TV, he tore off his microphone and walked out of the studio. A few days later, massive protests swept through Reykjavik. People demanded his resignation, and he resigned. He became the first politician to lose his position because of the Panama Papers. And there were others. British Prime Minister David Cameron's father, friends of the King of Saudi Arabia, associates of Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko, relatives of Chinese President Xi Jinping, soccer star Lionel Messi and his father, actor Jackie Chan. People who publicly preached honesty and transparency while secretly hiding money in offshores. And here's what's important to understand. Most of these schemes are technically legal. Owning an offshore company isn't prohibited. The problem is why you're doing it and what you're hiding. If you're a public official hiding assets, that's corruption. If you're using offshores to avoid paying taxes in your country, that's tax evasion. If money from drug trafficking or laundered bribes flows through these companies, that's a crime. But the system is built so that proving all this is nearly impossible, until someone leaks the documents. Now it's time to talk about the person without whom we would never have learned this whole story. Or rather, about the person whose name we don't know. John Doe, that's what he called himself. The classic placeholder name in English, a designation for an anonymous person. In the spring of 2015, this person contacted a journalist from the German newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung through an encrypted channel. The first message was short. "Hello, this is John Doe. Interested in data? I want to share some with you." Journalist Bastian Obermeier initially thought it was a prank. Journalists get such offers regularly, and 99% of the time it's either fraud or someone's fantasy. But he replied, "How much data are we talking about?" The answer stunned him. "More than you have ever seen." And it was true. John Doe began transferring documents, first hundreds of files, then thousands, then millions, 2.5 terabytes of information. For comparison, all the WikiLeaks documents that shocked the world a few years earlier weighed just 1 gigabyte. What John Doe was transferring was 2,500 times bigger. It was Mossack Fonseca's entire internal correspondence over 40 years of operation. Emails, contracts, client passport data, bank statements, everything. The complete archive of one of the world's largest offshore firms. The German journalists realized they couldn't handle this alone. They needed resources, experts on different countries, coordination. They reached out to the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. This is an organization that brings together reporters from around the world to work on major investigations. The project received the codename Project Prometheus. And work began that the journalism world had never seen before. Nearly 400 journalists from 80 countries, over a year of collaborative work in absolute secrecy. Imagine how difficult it is to coordinate this many people while preventing information from leaking prematurely. One careless word, one social media post, and the whole operation is blown. The journalists created a secure online platform where they could search the database. Everyone worked on their region, their characters. Some checked connections of Russian oligarchs, some dug into offshores of Latin American dictators, some tracked money from Middle Eastern monarchs. Gradually, from the chaos of millions of documents, a picture began to emerge. A huge global system for concealing wealth, a map of connections between politicians, businessmen, and criminals that spanned the entire world. And then, on April 3, 2016, at exactly 6 p.m., Greenwich Mean Time, over 100 publications in 80 countries simultaneously published their materials. It was like a synchronized explosion. Turn on the TV in Moscow, they're talking about the Panama Papers. Open a newspaper in London, Panama Papers. Read the news in Beijing, they're there too. The whole world learned the truth at the same moment. The reaction was instantaneous. The website where materials were published crashed from the flood of visitors within the first minutes. Social media exploded. The hashtag Panama Papers became #1 in trends. People were shocked. Not that the rich hide money, everyone suspected that anyway, but by the scale, by how organized and widespread it all turned out to be, by the specific names. It's one thing when you suspect politicians are stealing. It's completely different when you see documents, bank statements, correspondence with lawyers. But here's what's interesting. Who is John Doe and why did he do it? He gave only one interview, anonymous, where he explained his motives. He said he worked in the financial industry and saw with his own eyes how the system was rigged, saw how wealthy people circumvent laws that ordinary citizens are forced to obey, saw the scale of injustice, and decided he couldn't stay silent anymore. Income inequality is one of the defining issues of our time, he wrote, but most importantly, he didn't do it for money. He refused any compensation, didn't sell the information, didn't ask for payment for an interview, just handed over the data and disappeared. His identity is still unknown. Maybe he was a Mossack Fonseca employee, maybe a hacker who broke into their system, maybe one of the clients who decided to get revenge. We don't know. But this person single-handedly launched a chain reaction that changed the world. Now let's talk about the consequences. What happened after publication? First and most obvious political resignations. Iceland's prime minister left, as I already mentioned. Pakistan's prime minister, Nawaz Sharif, was disqualified by the Supreme Court and removed from office. In Spain, the Minister of Industry resigned. In Malta, the prime minister's chief advisor left his post. In various countries, investigations began, trials, parliamentary hearings, but the most dramatic events unfolded in Malta. Daphne Caruana Galizia, a journalist who actively investigated the Panama Papers topic in Malta, discovered connections between the country's prime minister and offshore companies. She wrote about it on her blog, despite threats and pressure. On October 16, 2017, Daphne got into her car near her home, started the engine, and the car exploded. She died instantly. A bomb had been placed under the car. It was a contract killing. The investigation into her murder took years. Eventually, several people were arrested, including a businessman connected to the government. Daphne became a symbol of journalism that isn't afraid to speak truth, even when it's dangerous. Besides politicians, regular clients also suffered. Lionel Messi, for example, came under investigation in Spain. He was accused of tax evasion through an offshore scheme. He was eventually found guilty and sentenced to a suspended sentence and a huge fine. His father, who managed the footballer's finances, received the same sentence. Messi claimed he didn't know about the scheme, that everything was done by his father and financial advisors. But the court decided that ignorance doesn't exempt from responsibility. Banks also took a hit. It turned out that many major banks actively helped clients create offshore structures. HSBC, Credit Suisse, UBS, Société Générale. They were all on the list. Regulators began audits. Fines came pouring in. The reputational damage was colossal. Mossack Fonseca itself tried to fight back. They claimed they were victims of a hacker attack and illegal information gathering. They hired PR agencies, lawyers, said their clients were respectable people, that most of their services were legal. But it was too late. Their reputation was destroyed. Clients began leaving en masse. Offices in different countries closed one after another. By 2018, the firm announced it was ceasing operations. 40 years of work, 214,000 offshore companies. It all collapsed in 2 years. But here's the question worth asking. What changed globally? Did the system become more honest? Did the rich start paying more taxes? The answer, unfortunately, is disappointing. The offshore industry took a hit, but not a fatal one. Mossack Fonseca closed, but there are hundreds of other firms doing the same thing. Maybe a bit more carefully, with better data protection, but the essence hasn't changed. Money continues flowing into offshores. Yes, some countries tightened laws. The European Union adopted directives requiring more transparency from companies. Some jurisdictions created beneficial owner registries, registers of real company owners. But the problem is that the offshore system is global, while laws are national. As long as there are countries willing to provide financial secrecy in exchange for money, the system will exist. The British Virgin Islands, Cayman Islands, Panama, Liechtenstein, Switzerland, they all continue operating, maybe with slightly stricter rules, but still operating. And here's what's truly sad. After the Panama Papers, there were other leaks. Paradise Papers in 2017, Pandora Papers in 2021. Each time the same schemes, the same mechanisms, sometimes even the same people. As if nothing changed. Exposés keep coming one after another, and the system lives and thrives. Why does this happen? Because the people who use these schemes have money and power. They hire the best lawyers, lobbyists, PR specialists. They influence legislation. They do everything to keep the loopholes open. Meanwhile, ordinary people pay taxes from their salaries because they have no choice. Their employer automatically withholds taxes and transfers them to the budget. They can't create an offshore company and transfer money there. They don't have the knowledge or resources for it. It creates a double standard. One set of rules for the rich, another for everyone else. And the Panama Papers simply highlighted this injustice, showed how massive and systemic it is. So what can we learn from this whole story? Several important lessons. First, transparency is critically important. When deals happen in the shadows, when it's unclear who owns what and where money comes from, it creates fertile ground for corruption. Openness, public registries of company owners, exchange of tax information between countries. These are all tools that can make the system more honest. Second, journalism matters. Without the courage of that anonymous source, without the painstaking work of 400 journalists, we would never have learned the truth. In a world where traditional media is in crisis, where more and more news is published for free on the internet, it's important to support quality journalism. Investigations require time, resources, expertise. It's expensive, but it's necessary for democracy. Third, citizens must demand change. After the Panama Papers, people took to the streets in Iceland, Pakistan, Malta, and it led to real consequences. Politicians fear public pressure. If we stay silent and accept injustice as a given, nothing will change. But if we demand transparency, if we vote for those who promise to fight corruption and hold them accountable when they don't deliver, then there's a chance. Fourth, the problem is global, and the solution must be global too. One country can't defeat offshores. International cooperation is needed. Agreements between states on information exchange, closing loopholes, a unified approach to taxation. This is difficult because countries compete with each other, and some benefit from being tax havens. But if developed countries unite and start imposing sanctions against offshore jurisdictions that don't cooperate, the system can change. And the last, most important thing. The Panama Papers showed that an ordinary person can change the world. One insider who risked everything launched a chain reaction of global scale. Prime ministers resigned. Billionaires lost their reputations. Laws began changing. All because someone decided that silence wasn't an option. That justice was more important than personal safety and comfort. We live in a world where information is power, more than ever in history. One person with access to data can shake the foundations. The question is whether they'll have the courage to do it, and whether we, the rest of us, will have the will to demand change and not forget about the revelations in a month when the news cycle moves on to something else. The Panama Papers isn't just a scandal. It's a mirror that society looked into and saw how unfair the system is. What we do with this knowledge next depends on us. We can shrug and return to our lives, or we can demand changes, support journalists who uncover truth, vote for politicians who promise transparency, care about where our taxes go and why the wealthy don't pay them. The story of the Panama Papers isn't over yet. Investigations continue, trials are ongoing, new leaks will come. The question is whether they'll lead to real systemic change or remain just loud headlines that everyone forgets in a couple of weeks. The answer depends on whether we remember, whether we demand justice, because those in power and those with money really hope we'll forget, that the noise will die down and everything will go back to normal. Let's not give them that. Don't forget about the Panama Papers. Don't forget about Daphne Caruana Galizia. Don't forget that the system can change if enough people want it to.